Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the third session in a six-part series that we're doing with GrantsPlus. Today's session is about transforming grant prospects into funders. And we're so grateful to both Jessica and Kari who are joining us here today from GrantsPlus. It's been a wonderful series so far, a lot of really positive feedback. And so just want to offer first my thanks to GrantsPlus for and you and your team for all that you've done to make this a great series for our nonprofits. So I'm Maggie. I'm with the Scranton Area Community Foundation, and we have also the Center for Community Leadership and Nonprofit Excellence, which is the nonprofit capacity building arm of the foundation. So the Scranton Area Community Foundation, we've been in existence since 1954. We have assets of just over $55 million. We've distributed over $4 million in grants and scholarships. A lot of you are familiar with the work that we do also with other private foundations, the NEPA Healthcare Foundation and the Robert H. Spitz Foundation. We lead a number of community initiatives. And so we are a nonprofit tax exempt organization just like you. We're held in compliance with the national standards for community foundations. It's important for us to make sure that we are supporting your capacity and your ability to do the good work that you do and help you to better meet your missions, which is why we started the Center for Community Leadership and Nonprofit Excellence back in 2012. And so we are focused on providing the technical assistance, training programs, and other resources that you need to help you do your jobs a lot better. So the more capacity you're able to build, the more effective you're able to be, and the further our grant dollars go. So it's a benefit for everybody. So that's just a little bit about us. I'll have Kari and Jessica tell us a little bit more about GrantsPlus for those who haven't, had the opportunity to join us in other sessions, and just want to thank them very much. I'm going to have my camera off, but I will be here in the background for any technical assistance or any questions that you might have that pertains to me. But Jessica, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. We're so happy to be here and to be a part of this session. As Maggie mentioned, I am Jessica Salyers. I have been with GrantsPlus for about 3.5 years. My role with GrantsPlus is Assistant Director, mainly focusing on grant strategy with clients. Previous to GrantsPlus, I had been a Vice President for Fund Development and Community Relations for a human services agency in Cincinnati, Ohio for about 12 years. So thanks for having me, and I'll let Kari do an introduction as well here.
Sure. Great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Kari Elsila, and I'm a senior advisor at GrantsPlus. So in my role, I work with nonprofit organizations of all sizes and from all sectors, from all around the country, to help them improve their grant seeking. So that can be a variety of things, from prospect research to support around cultivation and relationship building, to grant writing, and just providing overall strategy, advising, and coaching. So with Jessica, I'm really excited to be here today and talk with you all about how to help turn your prospects into funders.
Thanks, Kari. So we will share a little bit about GrantsPlus really quickly. So we were founded in 2007 by Lauren Steiner, and we are based in Cleveland, Ohio, but we have a team of grant writing consultants and strategists and specialists throughout the United States. So we are not all just located in Ohio. And we have helped our nonprofit clients to secure over $200 million in grant funding for their important services and missions. Our partnership here with Scranton Community Foundation. So our partnership, as Maggie mentioned, is we're doing these webinar series. We are on series 3, I believe, today of 6, and these are happening every other Tuesday through December. And we're also providing one-on-one coaching opportunities. So these one-on-one coaching are sessions with our experts, and hopefully we are providing you with what you need to be successful in your careers. And we do have a landing page set up that has all the points of access that you need to participate in these opportunities. Upcoming webinars that we have as well. We have webinars on November 16th, which is telling your compelling story in grant proposals. We have one on November 30th, preparing your team to pursue federal grants, one on December 14th, attracting national funders, and all webinars are hosted from noon to 1 o'clock.
And as I think Maggie mentioned, also being recorded. So if you're not able to attend these webinars in real time, they will be available on YouTube.
So a little bit more information about our coaching sessions. As part of our partnership, we're offering these 30-minute coaching sessions in addition to these webinars where our senior staff can help guide you in your grant seeking efforts. So we have some quotes from coaching session participants on the screen here. Types of information that can be topics in our coaching sessions, maybe troubleshooting your approach to new or prospective funders, maintaining relationships with existing funders, helping plan or improve particular grant applications, improving overall grant seeking operations, things like that are general coaching topics. And yeah, so once you've signed up, you can check your email for a link and password to register for coaching sessions. The November sessions are Friday, November 5th. December sessions are Friday, December 3rd. And I will pass over to Kari to go over our agenda for today.
Great. Well, thanks, Jessica. Today, we're going to be discussing a couple different things. The overall topic is, of course, turning prospects into funders. So we're going to focus on improving relationships that you have with your current funders. We're going to talk about building new relationships with funding prospects that are new to you. And we're going to talk about how to share the love as you're nurturing those relationships. Grant seeking is really a team effort. So we're going to talk about staff and board roles and responsibilities and how you can work together as you turn these prospects into funders. If you attended our previous webinar on building a pipeline, this will follow nicely. But if you didn't, no problem. We're going to cover lots of good information for both people who were at the previous webinar and who are dropping in today. If you have comments or questions as we go, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom to drop in any questions, comments, things you want to ask more about, and we'll be monitoring that throughout and try to respond in real time as we go. So I first wanted to start with a poll before we get started. So I'm going to put this up here on the screen, and I'd like everyone to answer. You can select as many as apply, but the question is, when do you talk to funders? And please weigh in and be honest. We're trying to get a sense of how your current relationship building with funders goes. So you can select rarely or never talk to funders, when you're ready to apply for a grant, when you're finishing up a grant term and you want to talk about results, when something notable happens that you want to share, when you have a question about the local nonprofit community, and when you have a question about your work. So let's take another 30 seconds or so, and you can all just weigh in here. I see some results coming in. Take a few more seconds. All right, last few seconds if you haven't voted yet. Okay, great. I'm going to end that poll and I'm going to share the results with everybody. So this is fantastic. I love that nobody said rarely or never, which is great. That's what we want to see. Lots of people talking to funders when they are ready to apply for a grant. But it's really nice to see some of the responses for these later results when something notable happens in the work that a funder is supporting, when you have a question about your work. So really, we'll be talking a lot about these kind of topics today and hoping to move some of you who maybe didn't select those last three toward that end of the spectrum. But really the goal in your conversations with funders is to build genuine relationships that are not just transactional, but relational and built on genuine relations. So let me close that. Okay, so for those of you who were at the last webinar, This graphic might look familiar, but we wanted to briefly review two models of grant seeking, what we call the slot machine model, and then what we call the full grant cycle model. And these models align with the concept of transactional versus relational interactions that I just mentioned. So as you're looking at what we call the slot machine model, you can see that this really just is a transaction. The idea is, my organization needs money. Hey, you funder, you have money, and can we get some of that money? So you can see in this graphic that it's a one-way road. You really just send in a proposal to the funder, and maybe they'll send you money. Now, to be honest, this model does sometimes work. Sometimes you can just put in a blind submission and get money without any other communication or relationship building. It does happen. And sometimes there's funders out there who actually prefer this model, maybe because they're small staffed or no staffed, and they don't have the time to have conversations with potential applicants. Sometimes they want to see a formal written letter of inquiry as their first and only initial point of contact. So we know that model is out there. But unfortunately, because you can have success, even though it might be limited, but you can have success with this model, far too many organizations use it as their only approach, and that can be problematic. The problem with this model is, as you can see some of these bullet points, it's not dependable, and it really doesn't let you take a long-term strategic approach. You have no sense what the funder thinks about you or your work, really, other than they send you a check or they don't. You don't know what the funder is thinking about for the future, including their own future. Maybe they have shifting priorities they're exploring or new areas of funding they're planning to move into. So you don't know if you'll remain a priority to this funder, and maybe there's some other aspect of your work that would be a better fit or better priority with the funder's current or future interests. And it's really just not a partnership, this model. And this model doesn't even need a pipeline. You really just need a list of funders and deadlines so you can throw submissions out there. And again, you might get lucky, but it's really not sustainable, and it's not considered a best practice in the field. So in contrast, this is what we call the full grant cycle model, and it's really based on relationships and numerous and ongoing touch points, as you'll see. This model should look familiar to anyone that's done work with major donors or individual donors. It's really that individual donor approach, which is centered on intentionally building and maintaining relationships with supporters. So you can see that the cycle starts at the top with strategy and readiness. And this is really kind of internal work for your organization about knowing strategically where your organization could benefit from foundation support. So what are your priority projects and where are the funding gaps to getting those projects funded? And it's also making sure that you have the information you need to describe a program and its funding needs. So that's what we would call grant readiness. Can you describe the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the program, the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and the difference you're trying to make? So that's really making sure you're grant ready. And then you move into the identification phase, and that's really about identifying potential sources of support. It's about finding new funders, but also about ensuring that you know what your current funders are interested in. So this stage is really aligned with that building your pipeline and knowing where each potential funder fits in with your fundraising priorities and goals. Then you move to cultivation, and that's one of two places in this cycle, along with stewardship, where you deliberately build relationships with funders. So we'll be talking about that a lot later. That's really the meat of our discussion today. Then you move to the ask, which is your formal proposal submission. And we will say that at that point in the cycle, you'll either be funded and you'll move on to doing that funded work, or you'll get a decline. But in either case, you'll continue with that relationship building through that stewardship and nurturing that relationship. You're going to keep that funder in the loop about all the good things their funding is supporting, like a lot of you in that poll that did indicate that you're doing that. So you want to build that relationship, not just when it's time to ask for money. And again, we'll be spending a lot of time on that today. And one thing to note is the best stewardship is really genuine, but it can be informal. It's not just formal reports. There's lots of different ways you can have those touch points. And then the cycle continues again, Now, some of these phases may happen simultaneously or in a slightly different order, but the important thing to note with this full cycle model is that it's ongoing. And you can see the benefits here off to the side of the slide. It's a relationship-based approach. It's based on two-way communication. It allows you to have room to discuss and plan, your long-term strategy with this funder. It's more dependable than the slot machine model. And you do need a pipeline, preferably a multi-year pipeline that's going to help you work your prospects through this approach. We want to talk about 3 reasons why it's beneficial to build real relationships with funders. The first is that it can help level that power dynamic between the funder and the grantee. And we all know that power dynamic exists. One entity has the money and the other entity is looking for some of that support. But when you build these real relationships, you are breaking that power dynamic down and you become 2 people working toward a common goal. You have the opportunity to talk about your shared commitment to the community and to addressing areas of needs or challenges that you both want to tackle. So you really become partners, and not just financial partners, but also thought partners who can share ideas and vision together, and you're coming to the table together. So really kind of taking away that power dynamic is the first reason to build these relationships. A second reason is that relationships create mutual understanding. You get to know the funder better and they get to understand you better. And that really leads to trust. And the more the funder gets to know you and your work, the more they'll be willing to support you in different ways because they know you and they trust you. And so this may mean they'd be open to funding new projects that you want to pilot or try out. They might be able to be there as a source of emergency support if you're ever in need of some emergency quick funding. And hopefully, ultimately it could lead to a funder who's more willing to support your general operating fund, which is kind of what we all aspire to. But once you have that trust built and they really know you and know your organization's good work, you can move them along the spectrum to general operating support funders. And a final benefit to building real relationships is that it's efficient. I mean, it can save you time and heartache. As you build these relationships, you're going to ensure that you're approaching the right funder at the right time for the right project for the right amount. When you have a good relationship with the funder, they might be able to give you some good insight and insider information around things like timing. Funders often have multiple cycles, and it could be at the end of the year, a deadline you might be targeting. They'll tell you, look, we're kind of running out of money. We think you might be better suited to apply in the first quarter of next year. So that kind of information is really going to help and take the guesswork out of your request. A couple relationship tips here. Do your research. You want to make sure you're approaching the right person at the funding entity. So take a little time to find out if there's a specific program officer in your area, in a small foundation, it might be the executive director, but you don't just want to pick up the phone and call the general number. You want to see if you can identify the right person. And of course, you want to make sure that that funder has a track record of supporting your work and that there's no question about the alignment. Timing is important. We recommend reaching out at least 6 to 8 weeks before a deadline to start to begin a dialogue and talk about what a request might look like. And of course, as we've discussed in that full grant cycle model, this shouldn't be the only time the funder hears from you. But if you are working backwards from a deadline and building a relationship, 6 to 8 weeks would be a good time to start. And then finding a connection, connecting with the funder through someone you know is really going to help open that door and make that relationship get off on the right foot. And we'll be talking about that more later. So this was just kind of setting the stage, but now that we've talked about why building relationships is important, we're going to get into the specifics of turning prospects into funders. And we're going to start by talking about funders you already know, because those are the ones that are, the warmest prospects to start with. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit more about starting with the individuals that your organization already knows or that you already know. So one way that we can think about this is as if our current funders are our organization's best friends. And that helps us kind of set the stage for thinking about how to properly nurture these relationships. So focusing on building relationships either a little bit more depth, or starting a relationship from the beginning, is to first think about who are those people who already know your organization and who have already shown that they care about your organization or you to a certain degree at least. And the easiest way to build those relationships is to show the individuals the difference that they are making by supporting your mission. And ways to do that, if you can think outside of the box a little bit and do things like sharing photographs of programs in action, or building as a building is taking place, steps in the capital campaign process, sharing testimonials from participants. If you have program participants, maybe even sending like handwritten notes from those individuals or from your staff or trustees. So trying to just think about unique ways to kind of nurture the relationship with these friends that we have. And we want to do more than just relying on the reports that we know we need to provide. So once we do receive funding, whether it be through a formal grant application or whether it be through a major gift from an individual donor, we know that we need to be providing more formalized reports. And it's definitely important that we abide by those requirements, but it can be a mistake to only check in when it's time to submit a report. We want to be expressing gratitude for the friendship that we have more often than just when it becomes time to do a report. One helpful tip can be to create a deliberate calendar or a specific rhythm in which you plan to check in with these friends of yours, so that it's not something that you think you'll get to one day. We all have a tendency to think, oh, yes, we should definitely be doing these courtesy reports, and we'll get to that one day when things slow down, and then that day never comes. So if we actually create a calendar or create some check-ins for ourselves so that it becomes a real to-do, a real task that we must check off our list to move our relationship and to move our chances for funding forward. So also sending emails or calls to update on the progress of a program or project is always a good idea. I know some of you in the poll mentioned that you do reach out if there's a significant and if there's some significant information to share, and that's definitely a good place to be. But thinking about just more general program progress, even if it doesn't seem like it's something that's super significant, it's something that your friend would be interested in hearing about. So that's a good way to think about it. We can also do little check-ins with our friends when we have maybe a new newsletter to share, or sending a personal note with the annual report that we're sharing. Things like that are other ways that it may be good to make a point of contact with our friends here. And then, of course, inviting them to be a part of major milestones. So if we have a gala, or if there's the first graduating class from some specific program, or an award ceremony, we want to definitely make sure that those individuals are on our lists to communicate with about major milestones. But through all of this, we want to focus on how the funder is creating change through our organizations. So how are we helping them support their own mission by funding us? We want to make our friends feel good about themselves. And one way we can do that is say, thank you for your support, and here's how you are fulfilling your own mission by investing in us. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about starting with who you already know, and we want to keep our friends in the loop about the changes that are taking place. So a key thing to think about is that our funders should learn about really any changes or any updates through us. They should hear from you, not from someone else. And this is especially true about a program that they are choosing to fund. So it's true for general operating, but if we have a funder that is funding a youth camp, let's say, and there's a significant change or some significant information to share, we want that to come from us before the funder hears it from someone else. Really, one fact of life is that funders are committed to their grantees' success, and they know that things go wrong. So sharing that information about lessons learned, challenges that we've encountered, is a great thing to do, and it's a helpful step in the process. Honesty is appreciated by our funders, and our funders ask us, sometimes in grant applications and sometimes semi-regularly, what have we learned from this process that we've gone through that can be shared with others who may be undertaking a similar program or project, or just advice in general. So it's always good to provide that honest feedback. More funders are willing to be flexible about grants as long as they're kept in the loop about the changes that are taking place. And especially in the times that we're in right now, with COVID-19, we've been seeing funders be more flexible, more willing to allow us to apply gifts to another area where we might need funding, things like that. So just being honest and being proactive in the outreach and communication to our funders. So an example might be something like, we've realized that the recruitment goals that we had set were going to be much more difficult than we thought. We'll only be able to serve 100 people in the grant term and not the 125 as we had originally planned. So that should be told to our funders in real time, not simply after the fact when it's time to submit a report. And then funders should also be the first to know about major staff changes. So for example, if there's a new CEO, a new vice president, a new program director, any of these new roles that are likely to be maybe in the press, maybe in a news release, maybe featured on your social media pages, if that's something that you can use as a tool to cultivate your relationship by letting your funder know in advance that this is coming or that this change has been made and you would like to make them feel as important as they are by getting a head introduction to these new staff people, that's a great thing to do in cultivating our relationships as well. And then the last one can be a little bit touchy, but we all know that scandals and controversies do happen. And we have situations where unfortunate things happen. Organizations get sued. We may have disgruntled board members who write some sort of scathing op-ed. We may have, unfortunately, finance officers who have disappeared with some funds for an organization. And it's absolutely critical that your funders learn about this from you and not from the news or not from a nonprofit rumor mill, that you're getting in front of these kind of scandals to the best of your ability and using that information to help build real trusting relationships with these friends so that we keep in good graces. Getting to know your funders. So this is about really getting to know your funders. So not surface level. And this shouldn't be an extra step. This should be a part of real relationship building that all of us as fundraisers are trying to become very fluent in doing with our important donors. So there's a little piece of advice on here. Remember that people give to people and grant makers are staffed by people. So we are all real people with real thoughts and feelings and emotions, and we want to get to know, we want to have that personal connection. It is important that the personal connection does always involve the organization as well, but getting to know one another as people and building these relationships is a very important part of the process. Humans don't trust just a concept like an organization, they trust the real people that are behind that work. So that should be an important factor in our relationship building here. The more that you and your staff get to know funders as people, the more you will trust one another, the more that you'll start to reap rewards over a long term. So we know that relationship building takes time and it's always worth it. So it's something that's worth investing in. So for an example, several years ago, GrantsPlus was working with an expert on client services to see how we could become more trusted advisors for our clients. And one of the first recommendations was for us to get to know our clients as people. And it's not a cure-all, and it may seem so obvious from time to time, but it really helped us break down some barriers to build trust between clients that we may have been struggling with before that. But really, it's easier to share good news, to share bad news, to move forward in your grant seeking and in the different bumps in the road that your organization might go through when you have a trusting relationship with the individuals that you're working with. This is about always follow up with a decline. So a no, you've probably heard this before, a no now is not a no forever. And it's always helpful to understand why a proposal was declined. So simply taking that decline and leaving that on the table and just walking away from that opportunity, that's really a missed opportunity in and of itself. 9 times out of 10, these conversations about why a proposal was declined lead to really good opportunities for relationship building, getting to know a little bit more about one another and about the organization and the individual's priorities. So it is an opportunity to build your current relationship or to start a new one. If you haven't spoken with a program officer before, it's an opportunity to call and say, I really would appreciate some time. And I would like to take the time to hear if there was anything better we could have done in our proposal. Was there a particular aspect that just wasn't resonating with trustees? To really get that kind of information and feedback. And most times you'll receive feedback that's very helpful in your quest for additional funds and your potential to submit a future request to that same funder. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Kari to start talking about building new relationships.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So yeah, we want to focus both on, converting those best friends, your current funders who you're closest to, deepening relationships with them, but also how do you build new relationships from the ground up with potential new funders? So the good news is that, when you're starting from scratch, new funders, it can really feel like a blank slate, but it's the opportunity to build a relationship from the start and put some of these best practices in place from the very beginning. Always a reminder as we think back to that graphic, that model, funders are an ATM, and you really can't develop a deep and meaningful relationship just by sending a grant proposal in with no additional, conversation or context or relationship building. So it really starts with a call or an email. We're seeing more and more funders wanting to use email during COVID as they're home and away from the office. But in any case, whichever medium you use, relationship building starts with reaching out and with that contact. There's an old joke in fundraising that says, if you want advice, ask for money. Do you want money? Ask for advice. But, that got to be an old joke because it does ring true. Professional grant makers, so those with staff, with paid staff available, are usually very knowledgeable about best practices and what's going on in the community as it relates to the issues that they're involved in. So they're a really good source for giving advice and also connecting nonprofits with others. So a really great low pressure approach to a new funder can be just to ask for advice about your programs. This lets the funder know what you do without you asking for money initially or directly. And it begins to build that trust and set up this idea of a partnership. It makes it much easier to call and ask for financial support in the future. So as you can see, here's some suggested language on this slide. After you've done your homework and this is a good prospect, you frame your call as looking for advice. So I see that the Awesome Foundation funds many food distribution programs. We're a food distribution program and we're looking to expand our pantries. So I'm wondering if you've seen other organizations that have expanded that might have some good advice to share, or if you've seen some things that have been successful or pitfalls, or just basically any advice for us as we look to expand because we know you've had experience in this area. So again, that's just a really genuine and friendly way to reach out to a funder to start building that relationship and set up the dynamic of partnership. So why is it important to make these calls and reach out? we really feel that a 5-minute call to a new funder can set the tone for a long-term relationship that you continue to nurture and steward, and that will pay off over time. So during this call, you really have the chance to introduce your organization and your work in a two-way conversation. So again, it's not just sending in a proposal that they review. That's a very one-way, straight line model. But through a conversation, there's some give and take, there's some good conversation, there's some good listening. It gives you and the funder a chance to ask each other questions. And again, helping you as you're having these conversations, think and learn and listen. That's going to help you make a better ask when the time does come to submit a proposal. So you're going to start to get a sense of what specific aspect of your work resonates most with the funder and interests them the most. That's going to help you develop a tailored approach or an angle for that funder when you do apply. Having that call up front also saves you time and effort, because if they're not really interested in you, or it turns out not to be a good fit, well, you haven't wasted any time writing a proposal and they haven't wasted any time reviewing it. Sometimes that clarity from the get-go of knowing that you're not a good fit is the best input you can get. And you just wish each other well and can move on. But even a no, as Jessica was saying, it can be a positive because you're starting to build that relationship, and a no today isn't always a no forever. You might develop new programs in the future or expand your own programming into an area that's of interest to the funder. Similarly, the funder might have shifting priorities or take a new direction in the future, so that the next time you call, you might be a better fit, and the funder will have some idea of who you are and your organization because you've laid that groundwork. And again, the last bullet here, making that call, making that contact begins that real relationship between two people and connects you on a human level. So what should be in this call? And if anyone has any experience calling a new funder and starting to build that relationship, if you have any advice on what worked well and what didn't, go ahead and drop it in the Q&A. We'd love to hear about how this goes, how this went for you in the real world. But these are the kinds of things you would want to be accomplishing with that initial call. Your objective is really to introduce yourself and your organization. You want to discuss your program and how it fits with the funder's priority. And that's really key. That's setting the stage for you to be partners, right? This is the work we do, and this is how it helps further your own interests and the funder's own interests. You want to talk about the people and the geographic area you serve. You can talk about the need for your program and any gaps in service delivery that exist that you're filling. So why you're different and unique, and how you're not duplicating any existing efforts. And talk about the impact and the outcomes of your programming. And again, how does that advance the funder's own mission? You want to show that you've done your research and that you know how your organization and your program fits with the funder. So you even want to use language like, our work helps further your mission of reducing food insecurity, or whatever it might be. You can talk about how that funder has maybe funded several similar or partner organizations in the past, so that you've showed, you can demonstrate that you've done your homework and know that this is an area the funder has a history of funding in. Then you just want to ask them if it feels like a good fit, and listen for feedback. Again, not just if it's a yes or no, but if there's any aspect of your work that's more interesting to the funder than others. You do want to be prepared. We say be prepared for a curveball. Even though you've done your homework, you might be thinking, I know the funder is going to be interested in this aspect of my work. Maybe you mention something that the funder really picks up on and wants to ask more questions about. So you want to be able to pivot and talk about other aspects of your programming, or specific pieces of the programming that are of interest to the funder as you talk. This call is also a good time to confirm the technical details of what a submission would look like. Again, confirming the deadline, getting any insight on timing. If there's if they have quarterly deadlines, maybe they would steer you toward a specific one of those deadlines. They can also help recommend an ask amount at this point. Again, you've done your homework, so you have a sense of what a typical grant size from this funder looks like. But They might be able to tell you as a first-time grantee, an appropriate grant size might look like this. And then you want to make sure, obviously, you thank them and that you make plans for the next touch point in your relationship building. So again, if you have any practical thoughts or experience with this, feel free to drop it in the Q&A so we can share it with the group. This sounds really basic, but you want to make sure you capture the information that you gathered from that conversation, both for your own memory and so others in the organization can access it. So, obviously the details of who you talked to and when, but also, what did you talk about? What was the result? And then what are the follow-up items, the action items that came out of this call? Maybe you said you would send them some follow-up information about one of the programs you mentioned, or you want to make a note to yourself that you want to touch base in another month or two. As Jessica said, you're going to make that a real to-do. You're going to put it on your calendar. You're going to build in these touch points in your regular workday. Maybe you want to add them to your mailing list or invite them to an upcoming event. So you want to be able to log all these action items. If you don't have a database system, you can use a spreadsheet or some other method. But again, it sounds basic, but you want to make sure you have a way of logging this information so that you can build on it with your future contacts. Now, other ways to connect, whether or not you've had success connecting with a funder on a call or email, because some of them, again, aren't going to be receptive to that. There's still ways you can nurture a relationship and think about that full grant cycle, keeping that in mind. There's other ways you can connect and build that relationship. And so here's a few ideas. A lot of times funders will be speaking at events. Maybe they're headlining, or maybe the Scranton Area Community Foundation is holding like a lunch and learn session with some funders, and they'll be there. So it's always great to show up to those. Maybe they're a keynote speaker at a conference or some other venue. A lot of program officers or other foundation staff also have social media accounts. They're tweeting out information about the work they're doing or the what's going on in the field. So it's great to try to find them on social media and follow them and, even contribute to the conversation. They might initiate on social media, find them on LinkedIn and ask to connect, certainly add them to your mailing list, all those things. So again, thinking about ways you can really build that relationship from the ground up, but finding different touch points to nurture that relationship. This one on the list in terms of connecting through other funders, it can be really effective. And I just wanted to share an example because there's a client I'm working with up here in Cleveland who's having a really effective outcome of working through other funders. So I just wanted to share that. But I have this client up here in Cleveland. It's a small grassroots organization. It's a staff of 2, and she's really trying to build her funding pipeline and increase her foundation support. So she's done her homework. She's identified funders. She's doing all this relationship building. And she had luck in getting the support of a prominent local foundation. And it came through a discretionary grant, which, just as an aside, just wanted to mention that that's another good strategy for building a relationship with the first-time funder. So as you know, a lot of funders, they have their formal process and their requests often have to go through and be approved by their foundation board. But a lot of funders will also have this mechanism of discretionary grants. So smaller amounts of funding, but that can generally be approved by staff members without going through the full foundation board. So it's usually a quicker way to get money, smaller amounts of money. It's good for first-time grantees as you're building that relationship and the funder is getting to know you. So anyway, this funder, this client of ours had success getting a discretionary grant from this first-time funder. And the contact at this foundation has turned out to be a real champion of this organization and this woman's work. And so as they've been building a relationship, she, felt comfortable straight up asking him in a respectful but direct way if he could help her approach other funders. And because she'd done her homework, she had a very targeted list of 3 to 4 targeted funders who she knew were good prospects in the area. And she shared that list with him and said, is there anyone on here you can help me make contact with and help open doors? And he said he'd be happy to do that. So he's going to reach out to his contacts at these foundations and help broker an initial conversation with this organization and these funders. And these are funders she, didn't know, didn't have any relationship with. She'd done her homework, so she knew they could be a good fit, but she's really using the relationship she does have to help open relationships with other funders. So that is a strategy that can definitely be successful. And I think, what we want to acknowledge is that building these relationships is tough for a lot of people. And even people who are in the development work, advancement work, and who work with people and foundations all the time, we all know that it's still hard to make a cold call, to pick up the phone or draft an email with someone you don't yet have a relationship with. But we also know that successful development people will gather up their strength and overcome that discomfort and really make it happen. And when they do, it can result in just in success. Foundations really advance their missions through you. As the slide says, they're in the same business as you. They want to help the same people you do. So you really are a partnership. They can't do their work without you. So you're really not, you want to reframe these conversations and this relationship building and move it from this point of you're not begging for money. What you're doing is really talking with a colleague about your shared mission of really making the world better in any number of focus areas. So we would just say, you're presenting an opportunity for funders to do their work, and you can do this. You guys can overcome, any discomfort or hesitancy about reaching out and really do your homework, build those relationships, and success will follow. And Jessica's going to talk about some ways you can call in some help as you do this.
Yeah, so we're going to talk for a few minutes about sharing the responsibility of the work. It doesn't have to all lie on the shoulders of the executive director or the development director or whomever the appropriate contact person is. So in order to share the work, here are some ideas that we have for you. So you can spread the responsibility around. It is important that there's a primary relationship within your organization and one person, who always has that cap on, thinking about being the primary relationship for a specific funder. But he or she doesn't have to be the only person who has a relationship. So you could include lots of other individuals. So another important note on here is to include the doers in the relationship. So that's the individuals who are making the change happen. So there's a change that the funder wants to see in the world, and they're hoping to see that through supporting your mission. And who are the individuals within your organization who are really the doers in making that change happen? So it might be other professional staff, it might be volunteers, it really might be anyone within your team. One example that we can think of is sometimes it's been very beneficial to include a CFO or a finance manager in a program call in the event that budget questions are presented. And then that CFO now has a relationship, and if he or she is out at a conference somewhere and runs into this funder, it's just another touch point for your organization. And you want to also make them a part of the ongoing relationship. So we talked about marking our own calendars and making these touch points part of our own to-do lists. But the other individuals who are involved in these relationships can also do the same thing. They can mark their calendars to maybe provide program updates. We do recommend that the primary relationship is always copied on emails or communications, or at minimum that the approach that's going to be taken is discussed with the primary relationship contact. But it is always good to involve others in that process as well. So in going on with that, spreading the responsibility, We can also utilize board members, major donors, and other friends of our organization to help open doors to new, or even to open the doors to a deeper relationship with an existing funder. So connections are really great for opening doors, and can sometimes even turn someone who may have been a marginal funder into a large funder via a grant or via individual giving. And connections are not necessarily going to convince a funder with supporting a mission that is completely off track with what you do, even if they have this great relationship. But they may learn a little bit more about your organization, be able to introduce you to other connections that might be a better fit for your organization. So it's really good to try to use these other individuals who can help open doors for you as well. It is a great use of connection to have individuals set up initial calls between your organization and a prospective funder. Sometimes it may be appropriate for them to participate in the call and then step aside. Sometimes it may be appropriate for them to just do an introductory email and then let you and the prospective funder continue on with the relationship. But we do want to throw a bit of caution about not relying on your connections to solely represent your organization or program. It's definitely a best practice to provide talking points or some sort of guide, and to really have an idea and a plan as to how this individual should help represent your organization, and not to just, turn over that responsibility to them solely. So the next part here is making sure that you have a plan, which kind of goes along with what I was just saying. So sharing upcoming cultivation targets with board members and friends. We do this in a lot of work with our clients. We may have a couple of foundations that a client is interested in pursuing, and we will share trustee lists, and we will ask the trustees to communicate with one another on who knows an individual or two within this foundation. And we want to make sure that there's a good plan in terms of, if more than one person has a relationship with a funder, who's actually going to be the one to make that call, who's got the strongest relationship, who's got the best connection. It's kind of the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing type thing here, where we want to make sure we don't have multiple people reaching out and saying different things, and just making sure that we have a good plan in place. Moving on here, we have a bit of an example of a board member to the rescue. And this is kind of what we're listing as a case study of a time in which a board member helped to build a really good relationship, which can save time and help to coordinate with staff and others who have a lot of other things on their plates as well. So the example here is our client is an education provider with no dedicated fundraising staff. We're all familiar with that, I'm sure, but has this goal and this need and desire to build their grants portfolio. So luckily, there is also a board president who has made a living on the phone, and since retiring is now happy to call anyone and everyone and talk about the organization. So this board member regularly meets with staff to discuss strategy and approach to get his next assignments from their pipeline in an order that works for them and for their goals. And then he works his magic until he can set up a meeting with the funder, the president, and the program staff. So this approach frees up time for the development staff, and has fortunately led to multiple productive funder meetings in the last year. So this case isn't really that unusual, and maybe it's not the board president, maybe it's someone on the development committee. It could be anyone, but it's just really great to utilize these connections as best as possible. So now we're just going to look at the topics that we reviewed today, see if anyone has any questions. I know we haven't gotten much in the Q&A so far, but a review of our topics so far is that we've discussed improving our relationships with current funders and where to start, building new relationships with funding prospects, and sharing responsibility among staff and board members. We also have our upcoming webinars here. Just another reminder that we have November 16th is telling your compelling story and grant proposals. The 30th, preparing your team to pursue federal grants. December 14th, attracting national funders, and these are hosted from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And as Kari and Maggie mentioned earlier, the webinars are also on YouTube for viewing if that noon time isn't good for you. You can check your email for link and password for information. So what questions might we be able to answer at this point?
All right, well, that's fine. Thank you everyone for attending. Maggie, I don't know if you have any words you want to wrap up with, but we appreciate everyone coming. We hope you learned some good information here, and I'm sure everyone wants to get on to lunch.
Yeah, just thank you everyone for joining, and we will be having this recording available up on the GrantsPlus site, shared with you probably by tomorrow. And we appreciate you all joining us and looking forward to seeing you at the next session. Kari, Jessica, thank you for your time today. Very informative.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone.